Hello everybody and welcome to another tier list here on the channel, and we have one that I've been excited to get to you for quite some time. It's a fantasy book titles tier list. This has been requested for ages, and it's gonna be a long one, right? Because there's a lot of fantasy titles that are worth talking about. Some real hot takes are gonna be coming from me today, I'm sure. And what we're gonna go ahead and do though is have an alternative tier list for this, because I found the standard S to D not necessarily appropriate because of how different the approach for these titles can be. So if you go ahead and look at this tier list here, we have it broken down a little bit alternatively. Starting off, we have Perfection. This is going to be held out for the few books that no one can think of a better name, because the title is the perfect iconic reflection of the source material, and the book itself probably has to have reached a certain level of just iconic status to even qualify for this. These are the titles that resonate like with the zeitgeist in society and are just so perfect. Next, we have two tiers that I'm going to consider on equal setting. They're just different goals for the title itself, so I felt the need to kind of break them up. And we have the pretty much A tier of the poetic approach, which is these are just beautiful in how they read, and they are titles that reflect the book well and really have an appeal outside of even just the context of the story. They just strike you right. Next up, we have the solid. These are the ones that don't necessarily have a poetic title, but the title itself is still rock solid and reflects the material magnificently. Below that, we have good. Anything can qualify here if it's poetic or just kind of the more general approach, and it's just good. It doesn't necessarily reach the A tier above that's been split. Below that, we have generic, which is going to be something that a few books fall into. You gotta admit, a lot of fantasy books have generic-ass titles, and we're gonna talk about that problem here. And I don't want generic, though, to be considered bad. You can have a generic title that still sounds good, right? It's not a horrible thing to be a bit generic, especially in fantasy when you're trying to hit that appeal and have something that communicates a clear thing within your story. So that's why so many, fantasy books have sword of something or other, sword of truth, sword of Kagan, sword of blah, 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 sword and stone. There's a lot of those for fantasy. And it doesn't mean the book's bad. I'm just talking about the quality of the title. So I think generic can still be good, but there's a generic aspect. And then below that, we have the bad. We have the leaves something to be desired, it's not awesome tier. So these are the ones we're going to be going through. And I have 33 books that we're going to pile on through, and I'm excited to do so. So let's go ahead and kick it off with a Joe Abercrombie one, The Blade itself. Joe Abercrombie really has a way with titles, in my opinion. I think he's actually gotten better if you've seen his bibliography go on. I like more and more what he's bringing to the title, but even this early on, really his first law book, The Blade itself, that's a great name. I'm going to go ahead and put that lower in the solid. I don't think it's near like perfection, but The Blade itself tells you a lot and certainly matches the tone of the story you're about to read. So I'm going to say let's go ahead and put it in solid, which is low. I'm going to say low A tier right here for the equivalent of the other one. Next up, we have Promise of Blood from Brian McClellan. Find that to actually kind of sound a bit like a Joe Abercrombie title. These two have titles that kind of work for each other a bit there. But Promise of Blood, I'm going to put above The Blade itself because I think it's a bit more oomph to it and does still certainly match the story behind it. A little bit more of a solid A there. Really enjoying it. Now we're going to flip back over to another Joe Abercrombie. A Little Hatred. I love this title. It's like charming in a disturbing way. It certainly is the best representation of Joe Abercrombie's personality as a writer, I think, of any of the titles of his I've come across. It's like cheeky in an odd way. So I'm going to go ahead and put that above Promise of Blood. We had just three solids back to back to back. So I think solid might be a bit crowded by the end of this. We have 33 titles to get through those, so we're going to have a lot to talk about. But those are three titles I really do love. None of them I feel like are poetic in any sense. That's kind of be Rothfuss's territory for sure. Next up, we have one that I think is going to fall into generic, Sword of Kagan. So I really loved Sword of Kagan. It's so next level for fantasy, meaning in like it's where I think the genre is going. Sword of Kagan, brilliant. But it's sort of blank. I don't think it's a bad title, but it's certainly what I would consider generic for fantasy. It doesn't tell you a whole lot about the story on face value, and it's a representation of what's inside in a fine sense. It's not mind-blowing next level or anything like that. So I'm just going to leave it in generic. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with me there. Leviathan Wakes. I'm going to go ahead and say is a bit poetic, but I'm also going to elevate to perfection. This is such a magnificent title for this book. It hits like twice. It has Leviathan Wakes. You're like, that sounds good. And then you think about it and you're like, that sounds, hello there. Like that's, oh man, that's good. I love Leviathan Wakes as a title. And it just matches the book. It's oh yeah. I don't need to talk about this because it's Leviathan Wakes. Like, can you think of a better title for this? No, you can't. And honestly, if I'm like of the opinion that The Expanse on Amazon, if they wanted to draw more eyes just on the title value, they should have pulled a Game of Thrones and instead pulled in Leviathan Wakes and make that the title of the show. There's my hot take right there. The Expanse is interesting as a title, don't get me wrong, but Leviathan Wakes as a title for the show, I think would have gotten more people's ears to do a little prick up and go, huh, what's that? Let's go check that out. Just saying. Never Die. It's a bit generic, if I'm being honest. Never Die. Like, you know, there's those fantasy books that just have titles that are, you know, they're just trying to hit you with something like Never Die. There's quite a few of those. But it's it's a really solid reflection of what happens in the book. I think the book's good. I mean, I gave it a pretty positive review. It's a fun video game paced type book, and I think I'm gonna leave the title in just good. It's Never Die. It's good. You know, consider that like C to B tier for the other comparison lists, and I think that's an okay one. The Name of the Wind, certainly in the poetic vibes, really good reflection of what's in the material, but if I'm just picking this up off the shelf, I am also thinking this poetic, it's generic too. It does seem a bit generic, so if you're remembering generic here doesn't necessarily mean horrible. I'm going to go ahead and put this at top of generic. Don't get me wrong, I'm not insulting Patrick Rothfuss's prose. The guy has some of the best prose in the game. No one can deny that. But this title, it's just not elevating for me. Honestly, like any other King Killer book title would be higher up for me. I think I would put A Wise Man's Fear in poetic. I would certainly put Slow Regard of Silent Things in poetic. Actually, yeah, let's just go ahead and put Slow Regard of Silent Things. That's probably going to be top of poetic. I don't think of anything that can really top that for the poetic one right there. Yeah, so just to justify, no, I'm not just dumping hate on Patrick Rothfuss, but I do find The Name of the Wind to be a bit generic for me. Baptism of Fire. Ooh, that hits, doesn't it? That's a spicy title right there. I like it. I'm definitely at least solid. Do I want to put it? Do I like it more than A Little Hatred? Baptism of Fire versus A Little Hatred. They hit different, right? That's like a weird thing to compare. Or do I want to consider Baptism of Fire poetic? It is a bit poetic to think, you know, Baptism of Fire. It kind of has this grandiose appeal to it. I don't think it's kind of poetic in the sense that I'm meaning for this tier list. That poetic in the kind of, okay, the title itself has almost like a rhythm. Baptism of Fire isn't hitting that. So I'm going to go ahead and relegate it to solid. Baptism of Fire, I think I like it a bit more than Promise of Blood. But I don't like it more than A Little Hatred. I like the cheekiness of A Little Hatred. There's something in there that just is so on point for Abercrombie. So I'm doing that. Winds of Winter. So this is an example of, there's a lot of genericism or generic qualities. Genericism's not, okay. There's a lot of generic qualities to Martin's titles, but almost all of them, once you put them in the grander context of the story, have a bit more appeal. Like Winds of Winter, if you don't know the story of Song of Ice and Fire, is just kind of It's definitely kind of falling in generic as well. Maybe you'd put it in good, but I'm actually, because of the context of the story, and if you're a reader who's really invested in the Song of Ice and Fire, and you hear this next book is called Winds of Winter, you're going to go, oh, like, you know, let's pretend the show didn't happen. If you've just been reading through and this title's announced, you're now more excited for that next book because of it. So I almost want to give that appeal to all the way up to solid. But instead, because the Winds of Winter is dragged down by a bit of a generic thing to me, I'm going to say it's not generic to the point where it should be relegated to generic. Well, maybe it should. Like, right, that's how I'm dividing this up. Anything that hits me as generic is kind of just put in here unless it's so elevated out by the personality. And I don't think Winds of Winter has a strong enough just feel to it to really pull out of generic. And it's not, you know, it's more generic than it is good. So I'm going to put it top. No, because I don't like it more than The Name of the Wind. I think Name of the Wind is better than Winds of Winter. Although I love the alliteration. I'm also a sucker for alliteration. That's a really weird quality I have, but it's totally true. You know what? No, I'm going to go with my gut here and say that because the context of the story is so great and so ominous, Winds of Winter, I'm going to go ahead and just put up at the bottom of Solid, and Solid's going to be crowded. Let's just get over that. The Fellowship of the Ring, pretty much guaranteed perfection there. No one should really argue with that. One, on face value, good title, amazing reflection of what the book is, because it is the story of the Fellowship of the Ring. It has a nice cadence to it. The Fellowship of the Ring hits well, flows off the tongue. It's iconic more than any other book title on this list by a huge margin. But I'm going to have controversial opinions for these next two here. The Two Towers. It's good. It's good. I don't think it's stupendous. It's actually a bit generic, but I can't really chalk it up to being generic because it's Lord of the Rings, so I kind of made the generic thing. Like a lot of people copying this kind of thing, so I'm not going to attribute generic to it. But I don't think it's super solid. Like there are other titles that I think could have been better. I think Two Towers is held in such high regard because it's the Two Towers, but I don't love that it's the name of it. So I'm going to just put it at the top of good, and there's going to be a flood of hatred for me for that. Don't think I'm reflecting the quality of the book. I put Lord of the Rings at my number one spot recently for like top fantasy series. I love Lord of the Rings. I just find the Two Towers to be an okay title. It's just not anything better. And here's the next controversial opinion. The Return of the King. It's a spoiler. It tells you how something's going to go down, and I don't like that. If you pay attention to the text, you know who this is referring to. You know it's just basically unveiling something in the plot, and I think that's annoying. That being said, it's a solid title. The Return of the King hits well, so I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, it's solid. Probably put it above the Winds of Winter, but I also just don't like that it's telling you The Return of the King, and you're like, oh, I wonder what that could be. Like, I know, because it's like classic fantasy, it's not the same vibe or whatever, they didn't have that problem, but it bothered me, okay? It bothers me a bit. The Lone Drow, very good. I actually really like The Lone Drow, or as Drow. You groups who debate that endlessly, you have fun in the comment section. I'm going to keep saying Drow. I hate the word Drow. Drow sounds cooler, so I'm saying Drow. The Lone Drow really hits well. I think The Lone Drow does hit well. It's not poetic or any sense. It's just a solid book title. And I'm going to put that just below The Return of the King. I'm just going to put that right there. All right. So next up, we have Feast for Crows by George R. R. Martin here. And this one is just phenomenal. Feast for Crows, in terms of what you've learned in the story so far and everything here, Feast for Crows, just love it. Love it, love it, love it. Definitely kind of has the matching ominous vibes here that you need for A Song of Ice and Fire. Again, I don't love the covers. I've covered that many times for this series, but yeah, that's definitely, I think, going to go right above the Blade itself. Feast for Crows, beautiful. Ninth House. This one really does a good job within the text of meaning something, but on face value, if I picked up a book and just read Ninth House, zero appeal for me in that sense. Like, I'm not drawn in at all. I think the cover's gorgeous, and I love this book, but Ninth House, the title, it's just good. It's nothing wrong with it. It's just, it's good. It's good. It's not generic in any way, but it's just good. I'm going to put it below Two Towers and above Never Die. The last Argument of Kings. What an extraordinary title. Love it for Joe Abercrombie. Last Argument of Kings. So good. And the more you think about it, the more it's kind of like, oh, damn. Like, really sets up the story. I'm actually going to put this in perfection. I think Last Argument of Kings is the perfect title for this book, and I'm just going to leave it there. Though on note, I have put Fellowship of the Ring below Leviathan Wakes because Leviathan Wakes is just a bop of a title, and I'm all about it. Stormfront for Dresden Files. Love this series, like this book a lot. Title. And that's also because of the context of how this book pretty much, now the title's controversial because of things outside of Mr. Butcher's control. I feel bad about that. Sorry, man. But yeah, the title itself, I'm just going to leave Stormfront, The Way of Kings, very, very nice there. I'm going to say Way of Kings is generic. Don't get me wrong, that's a generic fantasy title. The Way of Kings, it is, and it's elevated out a bit, but I'm not going to put it as high and solid as I think some people are going to because of how generic it is. I'm not going to put it in generic because I think it's better than that, but it's not super high and solid. In fact, I think I'm just going to put it just above the Winds of Winter. I think the Lone Drow hits me a little better, hits me a bit better as a title in terms of getting me intrigued, especially with the point, let's not talk about Forgotten Realms, but I like it a lot. The Lies of Loch Lamora. That much alliteration earns you a poetic status, and I'm going to put that just below the Slow Regard of Silent Things. Lies of Loch Lamora is such a phenomenal title. And it's like weird amount of alliteration sets the quirky tone of the story that is darker at time. Very, very good. Red Sister. Yeah, it's got some meaning in the text, but it's just pretty generic to have I wouldn't even say it's generic. I'm just going to put it in there. I love Red Sister. I've recommended it again and again and again and again. But the title itself, definitely better than Stormfront, I think, because of, the in-text meaning. But yeah, I'm just going to put that in because it's just Red Sister. And I think there could be better titles from, playing with things from the text there. But it also set up the whole trilogy to be named Red, Grey, and Holy Sister. But I don't know. I wanted something a bit more there. And actually, don't get me wrong, I actually really enjoy Dresden titles in general, and there are several I wish I could have brought in here, but I didn't want it to be like a whole Dresden list, because I like Jim Butcher's kind of two-word, constant tongue-in-cheek thing. Just Stormfront's not necessarily his best work. The Thousand Orcs. I mean, that's kind of really generic, right? 1,000 orcs, it's just like, oh, okay, that's fantasy as all hell. Well, is it necessarily generic to name? There's not a whole lot of books titled 52 elves. So I don't think it's that. I'll leave it in good. I'll put it just above. I mean, I could definitely see a lot of people reading the 1,000 orc, looking at that cover, but I can't take cover into account. A lot of people reading 1,000 orc and going, ooh, what's this about? That's gonna have a lot of action, and it does have a lot of action. So I'm gonna give it credit for that. I'm going to put it right there in 9th house. Game of Thrones. It's the first book in A Song of Ice and Fire, and it's just got that Martin appeal, which is just like, oh man, there's something there that I really find appealing in Martin's wordplay there. I don't think anything Martin is going to go below solid. I like it more than Winds of Winter. I actually like it more than Way of Kings. I like it more than The Lone Drow. Yeah, I'm going to put that right below Return of the King. I'm going to put it right there. That's a good spot. Fire and Blood, going to be honest, even with the Martin context, this just seems generic to me. It doesn't, we have things like Baptism of Fire, which I think are going for a similar vibe, but accomplish it so much better in their title. This, to me, seems like the first draft of a title that eventually turns into something as awesome as Baptism of Fire, and they just didn't have the creativity to come back and think of something better. So it's generic. It doesn't pop to me much, and I'm going to put it probably just above the Sword of Kaigan. The Three-Body Problem. Put this in there to have a bit of a different appeal, a little bit outside the box. But I think it's a really good one, especially how much it reflects the inner text, and it's good enough to definitely be in good. Put that above 1,000 Orc. That's going to be a weird one. People are going to have a problem with that probably, but I'm okay with it. Eye of the World. That's a great title. I really think it definitely earns solid. Enjoy it. It's not perfection is that Eye of the World? Is that poetic? No, not really. Poetic's becoming weirder and weirder to define as this goes on, because there's certainly cases to be made that other ones of these could go into poetic. But I think you guys in general are going to understand what I mean when I'm saying there's something about those titles that hit you in a way that's just so different. It's difficult to compare them to solid. But Eye of the World, I like it more than Way of Kings. I like it more than Lone Drow. Game of Thrones. That's actually they're so different in what they're competing you. Game of Thrones tells you this is political intrigue. Eye of the World kind of communicates this is a fantasy adventure with grand epic themes or something like that. It tells me there's some real magic going on here to have something called the Eye of the World. And that's actually a really nice reflection of the differences in these series. Yes, they both have grand fantasy elements. Yes, they're both politics at large chunks, but the difference comes down and could be personified in these title differences, which is kind of poetic in itself. But which do I like more? Game of Thrones or Eye of the World? Another thing is I've said Eye of the World so many times in my life that it just starts to not mean words anymore. You know what I mean? I think people get what I'm saying. I'm going to say Eye of the World. God, that's pretty much a tie. I'm going to leave Eye of the World and Game of Thrones in a tie. I don't have a strong preference between the two because I like the implications of Game of Thrones more, but I think I like the way Eye of the World hits me a bit better. Oh, wait, I accidentally confused. Oh, whoops, I actually put Last Wish when I meant Baptism of Fire. So Baptism of Fire is actually this cover. Oops, but let's go ahead and put Baptism of Fire where it was. And then I'm going to... Wait, did I have Baptism of Fire above or below Promise of Blood? Oops. I think I had it above, right? Yeah, let's go ahead and leave that above. And then we have The Last Wish. Last Wish is good. I don't think it's generic. No, that's pretty generic for fantasy. The Last Wish, that's kind of generic. Yeah, it is. It's kind of in that same Name of the Wind fantasy vibe. Definitely like it more than Fire and Blood, so I'm just going to leave that there. Let's go ahead. Actually, do I want to drop Fire and Blood to eh? I really think I do. I actually want to drop it to eh, just above Stormfront, to be honest. I just don't like that. Fire and Blood to me just sounds so... Like, it's not even generic enough for me to put it with the good generic titles. It's generic enough that I just want to go, eh, like, you just get out of here. I'm sorry. I know people are going to rally against me on that, but because it does really reflect a lot of the themes, but you could have so many better titles to reflect those themes well. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. That is a solid title. I'm going to put it at the bottom of solid. I think it's good, because it just has magical item. Actually, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put this just below Two Towers. No, I put it above Two Towers. Philosopher's Stone is now the top of good, which, remember, is still good. Like, that's good. And I'm going to come in here and say that they changed it to Sorcerer's Stone for the American copy, which I think is annoying and dumb, and I'm going to put it at the bottom of because I hate how they did that. It's stupid. We Americans can get behind Philosopher's Stone. This is something that still bugs me. So, yeah. You for doing that. Anyway, Scythe. This is just one that I actually want to do is put in here as just a good example of good. Like, I don't have any problem with Scythe. It reflects a lot what happens in the text. It's good. It's fine overall. This is pretty much the exact middle of the road for good, and I want to put it probably just below Ninth House. I find Ninth House to have a little bit of intrigue in a way above Scythe for me. The Black Prism by Brent Weeks. This is one that is so much better the further into the series you get. This is a title that grows in meaning, which I really enjoy, and has so much reflection. So it definitely earns a solid place. And I'm going to go ahead and say is probably just above the Winds of Winter for me. Going to put that right there. That's good. That's good. Crossroads of Twilight. That's a great name. That's a really great name, I feel like. So I'm going to put that just above Game of Thrones. No, I'm putting above Return of the King. Crossroads of Twilight. I like that. It has a lot of hit behind it. Yeah. And then the final one we're getting into here is The Final Empire, which isn't a bad name. It's generic. I'm going to give it that. It's a generic name. The Final Empire for fantasy is a generic name. To me, at least, it strikes that way. But it also is super confusing, and Brandon's marketing team, I think, has even admitted this, that it was a mistake to name the first book in a series The Final Empire, because it sounds like an ending thing, and that's actually, I think, part of the reason I've heard from various sources that they're trying to just rebrand as the first book being called Mistborn. Like, they had this is the title if you look at the first printing, and it's like, wait, no, Mistborn. So, I don't know. To me... it has an issue that way where now people are just I'm gonna say it's probably just gonna be the top of for me. Don't get me wrong, love Mistborn, love it so much, but The Final Empire doesn't strike me as anything super spectacular or fantastic. And let's go over this one real quick. Leviathan Wakes is perfection to me, and I can't think of a better title. That's great. Fellowship earns that spot because of its purely iconic status, and Last Argument of Kings earns that because I think it's just absolutely extraordinarily good title for reflecting what's in the text, and just the epitome of Joe Abercrombie's appeal there. Poetic, Lies of Locke Lamora and The Slow Regard of Silent Things, they're long-ass titles that hit you in a way where it's just like that. Ooh, that's a nice way. And I think those are two really rock solid there. Honestly, if I had to put these in solid, I think they'd both go to the top. So actually this kind of just works out right there. Actually, Lives of Lockermore might be below A Little Hatred. I have a weird liking for A Little Hatred. Just give me that. This one, do I want to rearranging these? A Little Hatred, Baptism of Fire, Promise of Blood, Feast for Crows. Actually, I'm going to put Feast for Crows above Promise of Blood, I feel like. No, Promise of Blood is such a good... I don't know. Maybe, am I valuing Promise of Blood too high? I feel like I might be. Promise of Blood isn't... Yeah, the Blade itself I'm going to put above Promise of Blood. And I think that's... Oh, man, I'm definitely going to put it Crossroads of Twilight above Promise of Blood. Return of the King, Promise of Blood. I'm going to put Return of the King above it. Oh, this is getting quite the demotion. I'm going to put it below... Yeah, I think that's where I'm going to leave it. I think I'm going to leave it there. The Lone Drow... Actually... I'm putting Promise of Blood there. It's still solid, don't get me wrong. I like the title Promise of Blood. I think what was happening was I was looking at that cover and going, damn, that's a good cover, because really it is. Oof! Promise of Blood is one of the best covers I've seen, full stop. And I was letting that win me over. But Promise of Blood just earns above Winds of Winter there. I think that's it. That's fine. That was way too high. So now we have Feast for Crows, Blade itself, Crossroads of Twilight, Return of the King, Game of Thrones, Eye of the World, The Lone Drow. God, that Lone Drow has a vibe to it. Drow, as some people are going to comment. Okay. The Way of Kings, Black Prism, Promise of Blood, Winds of Winter. I'm going to put Winds of Winter. I'm just going to put this right there. It's going to bother me if I don't, so I'm doing that. And then we're going to have Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Yeah, that's fine there. Two Towers, The Three-Body Problem, Thousand Orc, Ninth House Scythe, Never Die. Never Die might be a bit high, but I like something about Never Die, and, you know, its reflection with the material, obviously. The Name of the Wind, that's a bit generic, but I think it fits there. It's still good. Like, I still like Name of the Wind as a title. So consider generic and good to be on the same level. I'm just separating those out because they have, you know. Last Wish, yeah, that's fine there. Sword of Kaigan, that's the epitome of generic for fantasy. The Final Empire, yeah. Red Sister, Fire and Blood, Stormfront, the Sorcerer's Stone. Seriously, I'm mad about the Sorcerer's Stone thing. Like, I still am to this day. It's going to be something that bothers me forever. But I'm pretty happy with this titles tier list. Let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. Let me know what titles you'd like to see me rate next, and where am I horrendously wrong here. I know a lot of people are going to wish I've included Memory of Light. So let me just say, if I was going to put Memory of Light in here, probably right above Baptism of Fire. Yeah, I think I'd put it right there, because there's going to be people bothered that I didn't do that, so let's just knock that out of the park. Memory of Light, right there. But like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace. And of course, I'd like to give a special shout out to my latest high-tier Patreons, Mr. Fahrenheit, Ben, McCarthy, and Timbo. There's also one more here that is apparently in Hebrew, according to Google Translate, and Google Translate tells me it should be pronounced as Chamarion. I'm sorry, this is going to be rough for me. I did my best. Feel free to shoot me a message about a correction. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.